Oh dear. Children's Church, K through 6, you can leave. If you want to. You don't have to. Just out of curiosity, how many saw The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson? What kind of impression did that leave with you when you explored the Passion of the Christ, the last week of his life on earth here, at least before his crucifixion? What implication did that have for your life? How did it affect you? Just in a word or two, go ahead. Let's open the floor. What kind of impression did it leave you with?
Awesome reverence.
Awesome reverence. Okay. You can choose a word. I mean, it can be a sentence. It was word or two is kind of figurative. Anything else? I might have used the word horrified. Anyone?
Every time I see it in view versus reading it, it just comes to life, and it's just so amazing that actually happened. It's just
Right.
It's just such a visual.
Yeah. You know, the preacher's task is always to ask the question, so this is the text, this is the truth, what does it mean in our lives today? How is this, I don't want to say pragmatic, but how do you turn theology into praxis? How do you make this theology become real? Today's passage begins, or our exploration of the Passion of the Christ begins with the rest of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The gospel writers, they all tell it a little bit differently, and John has his own way. But as with all of the scriptures, the question becomes, what are we supposed to learn from this story in the way that the gospel writer tells it? And as I ask you about the Passion from Mel Gibson's portrayal of it, you know, I might add to what we've said. There's this reverence, yet there's this horror, but there's also this, my guess is there'd be a bit of a deep sorrow when you see the pain that was inflicted and the gore of it in many ways. There's a deep sorrow, there's a regret that this had to happen at all. There's just some horror at the gruesomeness of it. There's gratitude, right? You know, that's some of that awesome reverence. There's gratitude that it happened, but sorrow and the sick feeling that it had to happen the way it did. These are all important, and they can all be addressed as we near Easter. But this morning, I want to begin the journey through the Passion from the book of John with this very simple beginning, the story of Jesus' arrest. And it seems to me as we look at this story, the immediate impact can be discovered as we examine, we're going to call them three bigs this morning, and I'm probably because we're just fresh off watching kids play basketball for weeks and weeks, the word bigs is in my head, because if you're sitting on the sidelines and they put in the tall girls or the tall boys, then all of a sudden they talk about, they're putting in the bigs. And I was like, well, that sounds really not nice. Putting in the big girls now we're going to have something to do out there. Put in the bigs. And so what they are is they're the game changers. They're, you know, you have an average team and you put in some tall, strong players that become kind of dominant. It's a game changer. Well, the scriptures have their own bigs, and we're going to look at the three bigs from this arrest story this morning because these are the game changers. These are the truths that this story hinges on. And I got to listen to a really interesting sermon this week by Tim Keller. Do you remember Tim Keller? We used his series in our Sunday school class, and I don't remember the title of it. It was a 6-session series, The Reason for God, I think it was what it was called. And Tim Keller is a New York pastor who does some great work. He's a great theologian, and some of this sermon kind of grew out of what I heard him saying, and in structure at least. There's some really good points as we looked at this story of the arrest of Jesus from the book of John. And I said there were three bigs. We call them truths, three big truths, but these are the three bigs. The first one is very simple. It's a big statement, a very, very big statement. Let's go back to the text. So John chapter 18 is what Emily read for us. We find out that when he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was an olive grove, and his disciples went into it. So remember, this is the Passover. Jerusalem is a very full city, and there are certain curfews. They can't extend beyond the city very far, although this area that they are in is outside the city wall, but is still a place where they're allowed to hang out. But beyond that, it's against the law at this point to be roaming about. And this is done because there's a lot of people around. The Roman authority is very afraid of riots breaking out and all sorts of shenanigans, and so there was curfews put. But they're outside the wall. They're praying. They're going to the Mount of the garden where they're going to spend some time together. And we're aware now that Judas has already agreed with the chief priests and the elders, the Jewish officials, that he's going to betray Jesus, that they're going to march out to where Jesus is. This seemed to be a place where Jesus and his disciples hung out some because Judas knew they were there, knew that this would be a place they'd be hanging out in the evening hours, and so Judas knew where to find them. And Judas comes to them with what we read as a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. So essentially what you have is, it's actually a technical term. Detachment really refers to, I shouldn't say that really does, but it can refer to a detachment of 1,000 Roman soldiers. Now, nobody thinks there was necessarily 1,000 there, but at the very least, we're talking about a very large group of men. The Romans were going out to arrest Jesus, at least at the behest of the Jewish leaders, and they were coming armed for bear. This was a well-seasoned group of men. It says they had torches and lanterns, so they were going to be able to see, and they were armed. So in modern terms, we're talking about a few hundred soldiers, perhaps, armed with Kevlar and all the equipment, and night vision goggles, and a lot of automatic weapons. Okay, so they're ready to go. They're going to take this dude down. And then there is some law enforcement officers, if you want to call them that, from the Jewish leaders. So there's there's just a few of those, but they're gonna get this guy. It's kind of humorous in a way. I mean, Jesus at this point, he's giving himself up. He's going to give himself up, but they come armed for a revolt. So as they approach him, Jesus, this is verse 4, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out. So here they are, they're going to go hunt him down in the night, and as they enter the olive grove, Jesus comes out. Hey, who are you looking for? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. Now he says something that is absolutely astronomically big. In your text, it probably says, I am he. I am he. The reason your text says it like that is because it's clumsy in the English language to translate it literally from the Greek, because in English we don't speak that way. The phrase is ego eimi. I am. Who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. I am. Well, I am what? I am hungry? I'm sleepy, I'm tired. We always have to attach a noun or a verb to the end of this sentence so that we know what you're talking about. I am what? I am running, I am tired, I am hungry, I am sleepy, I am going to go to Grand Forks. We attach something. Jesus just says, I am. I mean, it's clumsy in English, so we put a little he on it. I am he, the one you're looking for. But that really kind of robs the passage of its power, doesn't it? If you know a little bit about biblical language, you know that this isn't just saying, oh, I'm the guy you're looking for. He's saying way, way, way more. That's why it's such a big statement. We go back to the book of Exodus to find out what he's really talking about. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, we find out that Moses is in we could call it the beginning of a bit of a confrontation with God. God is appearing to Moses in the form of a burning bush and calling Moses to be the leader that will take his people from Egypt, release them from slavery with Pharaoh, and bring them through the desert to the promised land. And Moses is a bit of a wimp at this point. It changes over time somewhat, but at this point he's like, I can't do it. What do I got to say? What am I going to say? And so he says to God, well, who should I tell them sent me? And what does he say? Tell them, I am sent you. It's awkward, isn't it? What do you mean, I am? That's not a name. That's not a thing. It's a pronoun and a verb. It doesn't really work in English. But he says, I am. Later on, like hundreds of years, thousands of years. In John chapter 8, verse 38, we find out that the Jewish authorities are questioning Jesus and essentially say, who do you think you are? And Jesus says, and it's a longer discourse than that, and he says, before Abraham was, I am. They went ballistic. They went nuts. They lost it. They wanted to kill him right there on the spot. He just said, I am. It doesn't even make sense in English. What's going on? The phrase, as we understand it from our Old Testaments, and as Jesus used it, is far bigger a statement than saying, I'm the one you're looking for. He says, I am. It's kind of fitting when you think about it, because if I just say, I am, you ask, you are what? And my response would be, exactly. I am everything. I am the essence, not me, but when Jesus says it, he says, I am the essence of what you call life. Without me, there is no you. Without me, there is no world. Without me, there is no creation. Without me, even if there was life, it would have no meaning. It would have no direction. It would have no bearing. It would have no compass. Without me, there's nothing. So God can say to Moses, tell them, I am sent you. The very source of life itself, of everything that has value, is sending you. God. The beginning and the end. So why did the religious leaders go nuts when Jesus said, oh, by the way, before Abraham was, I am. What? He just said, just so you guys know, I'm God. I've been here the whole time. Right since the beginning of creation till now, I'm here. I am, you know who you've been worshiping over all these centuries as Jewish people and making sacrifices to? You know the guy who gave you the commandments on Mount Sinai? You know the God who sent manna from heaven and gave you the promised land, and the one that you worshipped when the walls of the city of Jericho collapsed, and the one that gave you strength and empowered you to defeat all your enemies, and the one that allowed you to be punished and get sold into slavery and captivity in Assyria and Babylon and Persia. You know that God? Jesus says, yeah, that's me. That's me. No wonder the religious leaders went nuts. No, you're just a dude from Nazareth. You're no God. So they went nuts. And so now, Jesus is at the point of his arrest. And the soldiers are looking for him. He steps out. I love the scene because John does it differently than the rest. John makes it very clear to us that the soldiers aren't in charge. The Roman authorities aren't in charge. The Jewish soldiers aren't in charge. The Jewish religious leaders aren't in charge. Jesus is. This is going down exactly the way Jesus is dictating it's going to go down. So they're out searching for them with their night vision goggles and automatic weapons, or automatic swords and lanterns, depending how you want to look at it. And they're not really automatic because you still got to, it's not automatic reload. You got to keep swinging. And he says, hey, over here. They're like, I guess you just see it, right? Who are you looking for? He steps out to them and says, who are you looking for? I wonder if he knew or not. Jesus of Nazareth. Nope, not here. No, he says, I am. Wow. The God of the universe stepping out in front of soldiers who have absolutely zero power or authority over him, steps out and says, I am. Do you know that every founder of every other religion claims to point the way to the truth? And Jesus does exactly the opposite. Every other founder of every other major religion in the world says, follow me and I will show you the truth. I will reveal to you what I have learned. I will reveal to you, I will draw you to the truth. And Jesus says, forget that, I am the truth. You're not out looking for the truth is out looking for you. I am the truth. See, our default, in our culture at least, in our secular culture, is an interesting one. We look at all the religions of the world and we pick the best of all of them. That's kind of our default neutral, politically correct position. Well, let's look at Buddhism, let's look at Muslim faith, let's look at Christianity, let's look at the Mormons, let's look at all these religions, pick the ideas that we like the best, mix them up in one, document, and that's what we do. We just kind of live. I don't like any one religion, I just pick from all of them. They may even say, I like Jesus, I like what he taught, but I'm just not going to go all in on Christianity because there's a lot of other good stuff from other religions. The problem is that the statement that Jesus makes, the big statement, I am, it doesn't allow for it. There's no room for that in the big statement. Jesus goes all in. He says, no, I am. If there's truth in this world, it's because of me. If there's truth in this world, I am the source of it. If there's love in this world, or goodness, or kindness, or patience, it's because I am the source of it, and I brought it to the world. I am. Jesus simply does not allow for all of the religions of the world to have equal validity. You may not like to hear that. I understand that. And I would argue that you don't like to hear that because you've grown up in a politically correct environment, which really stinks because we're not allowed to say anything against anything except Christianity. But Jesus doesn't really allow for that in what he says. He just says, I am God. I am the source. All these people that have created all these religions, I created those people. He's really saying that Christianity is by far superior to every religion in the world. Now, you don't have to accept that. You can decline to accept that. That's you don't have to believe what Jesus is saying. That's your choice. But logically, if you don't accept who Jesus said he was, you really can't say he was a good teacher and like some of his teachings. I think Josh McDowell is one of the first people to put this out, and it's either Evidence That Demands a Verdict or More Than a Carpenter. I don't remember which book. But he puts it out there and he says, listen, Jesus was so polarizing that he really didn't allow you to be logical and kind of like him at the same time. Either you love him or you hate him, but you can't have it in the middle. Because Jesus, again, some will argue he didn't really claim to be God. Yes, he did. He did it obviously and intentionally and frequently said, look, I am God. He told the religious leaders, I've been sending you prophets for hundreds of years and you killed them all. Wait, what? You've been sending prophets for hundreds of years. How old are you? He's saying, I am God, as clearly as he can. He just didn't say God. He just said, I am. That's all he needed to say. So either Jesus is who he says he was. This is Josh McDowell's take on it, and I agree. Or he's a complete raving lunatic. He's a complete nut job. Those are the two options. Jesus didn't really leave middle ground. And if he's a complete nut job, he's a liar, he's a deceiver, he's not respectable, and you can't look at him and say he's a good teacher. I like some of the things he said. He had some good ideas. No! He's a liar. If I told you, I'm running for president, I'm a liar, I'm completely nuts. In fact, without my medication, I can barely make sense out of, a wristwatch. In fact, I'm a chronic liar. Half the time, I don't know whether I'm telling the truth or not. I'm really not very respectable. I have some problems. But you know what? I got some good ideas. You should elect me for president. What would you do? Yeah, good ideas are not no. And Jesus didn't really give you that option. He's like, either he is the lunatic, a.k.a. David Koresh in Waco, Texas. I am God, follow me, let's burn ourselves to death. Either he's a nut job or he's God. So you can't really logically say, well, I like his ideas, I'll take some of them and then I'll pick. He didn't leave you that option. And either Christianity is the most ridiculous religion in the world, far inferior to any other religion in the world because they follow a raving lunatic, or he is who he says he is. And Christianity is so far superior to any religion of the world, it would be crazy to accept anything else. That's it. Jesus doesn't give you the middle of the road option. And when he says, I am, you might understand a little more now why that is a big statement. That is a big, big statement. To say that Christianity is superior to other religions, incidentally, is not intolerance. Intolerance is when you're not allowed to say what you believe. To say that Christianity is a by far superior religion to every other religion in the world is not intolerance unless I don't let you disagree with me. And I'm telling you right now, you're free to disagree. What you can't do, and at least be logical at the same time, is go halfway with Jesus. Either he's a nut job of epic proportions or he is who he says he is. Tim Keller said, if you have a mild response to Jesus, you have no intellectual integrity. I think of our politicians, and we have what we would call the extreme sides of the fence. And lots of people fall in between, but we have the extremes, and the extremes never kind of like the president, whoever it is. They either love the president and defend anything he does. He could shoot his mother, and they would still say, well, he didn't actually shoot his mother. It was for the good of the country. I mean, that's how you would defend the one. On the other side would just say, he's terrible. He chews gum wrong. How can he be a president and chew gum like that? I mean, that's how it's a love him or hate him. And Jesus kind of puts us in that spot. You either got to love him or reject him completely. I accept him as the Son of God, as God himself, for many, many reasons, which would be entirely another sermon, which I'd love to break into right now and keep you for an extra hour, but we won't. One reason is I just have a hard time believing that someone who is a complete lunatic could have the impact on history that Jesus Christ has had. Thousands of years later, we are still talking and worshiping and confounded by the Son of God. That's not a nut job, but that's just one among many. Now, of course, as soon as you make a big statement like that, you create something else, and that is the second a big problem. The soldiers discovered it really quickly. Did you catch that? I am he. I am, Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, I am, ego eimi, they drew back and fell to the ground. What? Hundreds of soldiers. And if I'm just taking the text for face value, we're talking about 100 soldiers that are well armed with torches, lanterns, and weapons. And Jesus says, I am. And they cower. They step back and drop to their knees. These are seasoned men. These are seasoned warriors. And Jesus just says, I am. Who do you think's in charge here, by the way? The warriors who are kneeling, or Jesus, who's about to get arrested, beaten up, and crucified at the hands of those very soldiers? It's not an unusual thing in the scriptures. It's not the first time that it's happened. In Matthew chapter 17, verse 6, Jesus is walking with a couple of disciples. We call it the transfiguration. And Jesus reveals a little bit more of himself, and not just his humanness, but he reveals a little bit of the glory that is who he is as God. And they fell to the ground as though paralyzed. I love those scenes. You're walking with a guy, he all of a sudden starts revealing himself a little more, and you just, it's like those sheep when you scare them, they're walking, and you make a noise, and they just go, tip over. These guys fell to the ground as though paralyzed when Jesus reveals himself. Revelation 21, John talks about the same thing. I just fell to the ground. When I saw the glory of God, I fell to the ground and worshiped. I just dropped to my knees. I was paralyzed. I couldn't even move in his presence. What's the big problem? What's the essence of the problem? The big problem? Here it is. When God reveals himself a little more fully than we're used to seeing in the human form of Jesus, it is immediately more than we can handle. Hey, when we start seeing God clearly, it's immediately more than we can handle. When Jesus walked the earth, he was in human form. He had emptied himself in a sense. He was not allowing people to see his full glory in the same way he does in heaven. And when he did even just a little bit, I imagine Jesus to step forward and say, I am. And I don't know what he did, and I don't know how it worked, but in some way he revealed, like I said, he revealed a little bit more about himself. And as soon as he even hinted at who he was in this way, the people were paralyzed. Couldn't handle it. How does that make sense? I just try and think of our own insecurities and inferiority complexes. How do you feel? No, I'm not going to ask you. I'm going to tell you how you feel. You think it's like I'm going to let that go. See, I already get the wagging finger right there. I'm going to tell you how you feel when someone that you perceive of as better than you enters the room. And immediately there's stuff inside. And the more mature you are, the more that stuff doesn't churn. You've learned to deal with it. But someone that you perceive of as way better than you walks in, you go, oh, who do they think they are? And that's what goes on inside. You don't necessarily do that. It's just that feeling. Garrett and Darcy, can I share the story? Okay. Did you? I was wondering if you did. We were just talking. We went for supper on Friday night, and I said, this is so funny. However many years ago they moved here, I said, first impressions are so funny, right? I see this couple, all tanned and fit. I told them this face to face, so I'm not hurting them. I might be embarrassing them, I'm not hurting them. And they pull up in a white Cadillac Escalade and a van that says Extreme Fitness or whatever the heck it says on it, right? And I go, oh, well, who do they think they are? And it's not them, it's the inferiority thing. Ooh, the fitness couple's coming. And so you just immediately feel less about yourself. You do the same things. You see someone that you think is good looking, better looking than you, and you're like, oh, beauty queen just walked in. And we immediately feel insecure about ourselves. And this is how we are. We when something greater than us is in our presence, we struggle. What if that greater thing was so much greater than us that we couldn't even fathom how much greater it was than us? Do you think we'd go, oh, God just walked in? No, we wouldn't. We'd be so overwhelmed by this greatness that we'd be paralyzed. Because suddenly in the presence of the greatness of God, we realize how useless we are, how sinful and corrupt and broken. And what are you going to do? That's a big problem, people. You know why it's a big problem? Because the scriptures tell us that one day we're going to have to stand before that God at the judgment. And if we're like the soldiers, we're not going to be able to keep our footing. That's a big, big problem. Ephesians chapter 6 talks about putting on the full armor of God. And I never really understood it. And Tim Keller said something in his sermon. I said, oh, that kind of makes some sense finally. Then and after you've done everything to stand. Like, what do you mean, to stand? Why do you tack that on at the end? It doesn't make sense. So I'm putting on this full armor, and now I'm going to stand. But then I put it in a different context. It's a war. This is a warrior dressing for battle. And guess who wins? Last man standing. Last man standing wins the war. When you're in war and you lose your footing, you're dead. And I put myself in the position of every other human that's ever encountered the glory of God, and I look at my scriptures and they say, one day you have to stand before God at the judgment, and I'm going, I don't think I'm going to be the last man standing. I think God will. I think I'll be on the ground as though paralyzed. I'll see me for who I am. That's a big problem, because usually that means judgment. If you can't stand in the presence of God, you won't be in the presence of God for eternity. I got a problem. You got a problem. A really big problem, just like the Roman soldiers had. Still think Jesus isn't in charge here? Of course he is. So what then? Even in the arrest passage, we already are given a hint at a big solution. This is a big statement that Jesus makes that leads to a very big problem for all of us, and then is immediately handled with a big solution. You know, as the soldiers, assuming, finally get up and start moving towards Jesus to arrest him, Jesus isn't the only one in trouble here. He's got his disciples. And if they're colluding with this individual, they're in trouble too. They could be arrested as well. They could have been put in prison as well. And frankly, they could have been in prison and never heard from again. You know, lost in the system. easily. It didn't happen that way. I happen to believe by the divine intervention of God it didn't happen that way. Because those disciples were going to be the people that God was going to use to spread the gospel, not just in Jerusalem, but around the world, so that we have it today. And as God's divine intervention plays out, what do we see happen? Jesus steps forward again. I told you in verse 8, I am He, I am. If you're looking for me, then let these men go. Forgive them. Let their participation or your perceived participation in whatever is taking place, let them go. Jesus stepping in and saying, let these people go. I will take what's coming on their behalf. Prophetic. Even the Jewish leaders were saying it and didn't realize it. I don't know why I've never noticed this verse before, but it was pointed out to me this week. It's John chapter 11, verse 50. Maybe I've read it before and it never struck me. This is Caiaphas, the high priest, who's going to have a very lead role in making sure that Jesus dies.